Visual Studio Code is great, but if you're a web developer and you don't have these 10 extensions installed, you're doing it wrong. All right, we're going to talk about my top 10 web development related extensions for VS Code in 2020. So before we break all that down, if you're interested, I've got a free VS Code cheat sheet that you can download for free. I've got a link below. So go and check that out. Otherwise, I think we're ready to get started here. So extension number 1 here is the auto rename tag extension. Now, this one is pretty simple, maybe the simplest one or one of the simplest ones that is in this list, but it's also really valuable. And what it allows you to do, it's probably easier to show you than to talk about it, is if I change this div to an H1, for example, it automatically updates the bottom tag. So if I undo this, and then if I come down to the bottom tag, so it works both ways, and I update it there, it's going to update it in the opening tag as well. Now, that's not too big of a deal on something like this, like the opening tag, closing tag are fairly close together. What if you had like this main up here and you changed it there and then you had to scroll all the way down to this main to change it again? Well, with this extension, the auto rename tag, you don't have to worry about that. You just have to change it in one place and that will take care of the rest of it. Now, if you're curious what this source code is, this is from an app for a project, a mini course that I did on the Auth0 YouTube channel. This is about building an authenticated to-do app with Next.js, Airtable, Tailwind CSS, and Auth0. So if you're interested, you can go check that out. That's where this code is from. Other than that, let's get on to extension number 2. All right, so next up is the bracket pair colorizer. And I would say this one also is fairly simple, but again, really nifty for working with JavaScript. So what it does is it colorizes your bracket pairs if you maybe didn't put that together. So what I mean is if we look inside of here and look at maybe a function. So if we look at this, this React component here, we start off with this bracket here, which is yellow. And then notice none of the brackets in here are yellow. That's because it's waiting for this bracket down here to match. So there is the yellow matching bracket. And then inside of that, you get these matching purple ones, right? And then those are closed. And then you get this blue one, which matches this blue one, and so on and so on. And then even your parentheses, so your parentheses and your brackets. So maybe this should be parentheses / bracket pair colorizer, but it will do both of those to show which parenthesis or which bracket matches with another one. And this is so useful, especially if you get into a bunch of JavaScript and it's kind of hard to tell what's what and what goes where. That's a great indicator using this bracket pair colorizer. Now, I do want to show you or highlight one tiny feature inside of VS Code as well, is they have these, hopefully you can see it because they're really thin, but they have these little thin lines here that show basically the indentation for your code. So you can see this use effect. It's just a function if you're not familiar with JavaScript, but you can tell by this line over here, the faint one, that basically ends on this line. And you can see my return statement up here will go all the way down. See that how long that line is? It spans all the way down to here. So VS Code will add some context into how your code is laid out as well, but make sure that you have the bracket pair colorizer to give you those colors on your brackets also. All right, and then next up, this is actually a twofer, I guess, is either the ES6 code snippets, JavaScript ES6 code snippets, or the ES7 React Redux GraphQL React Native snippets. And let's start with just the vanilla JavaScript one. So these are just snippets, ES6 snippets, modern JavaScript snippets that you can leverage inside of your code. And a good example of this is an IMP command. So IMP is short for import. Make sure and go to grab one, or make sure to go and grab the right one here. And I run this and it's saying, all right, where are you importing stuff from? In this case, React. And then I tab over and I might want to get something like use effect. Now this is already up here, so I don't need it, but that's what that extension would be used for. And they have code snippets for imports and exports and functions and classes and all kinds of stuff. So these are really, really useful. Now, if you are a React developer, this is the extension you should have, the ES7 React Redux GraphQL React Native snippets. I wonder how fast I could say that. This one is really nice because not only does it have ES7 JavaScript snippets in it, it also has stuff specific to React Redux GraphQL React Native. So this is almost like an all-encompassing snippets library here if you use one of those technologies. So this is kind of a twofer. I would start with your JavaScript ones that we looked at first. If you are a React developer, then you might want to look into the ES7 React Redux GraphQL React Native snippets extension as well. That was actually pretty fast, I feel like. All right, the next one, this is one of my all-time favorites in VS Code, is the live server extension. And what this does is it allows you to basically right-click on a static HTML file, so just a regular vanilla HTML file. Right-click and you can open it with live server, which means it's going to run at a local server. You don't have to start up Express or anything, or Node Express or anything like that. It will do it all for you. So actually, I've got an instance of VS Code open. And I've got this app, which is a vanilla HTML, CSS, and JavaScript app for lightening and darkening a color. So if I right click on here and I jump down to open with live server with this extension installed, it will open up this application. I think, did I hack this earlier? No, sorry, that was before. This was from testing something else. I don't think I got hacked. So this opens up the application. You can see I can put in my brand color, for example, at red, and then I can lighten it by a certain amount, or with this toggle now I can darken it by a certain amount. So that works, and it's running at this port 5500, and it's a live reloading server. And what that means is if I come in to and get rid of this cross-site scripting test that I did, and I add in a piece of text here, this is going to now live reload and show me that text, and it works perfectly. It's so nice for working with vanilla HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. It just works. It's super simple. It's live reloading, so you can always see your changes as they're made almost in real time. All right, next up, if you are a developer, a lot of you are probably already sharing code snippets or pictures of code snippets, and Polacode is the way to go if you're not already using it. So what this allows you to do is, let's say I want to grab a little snippet here, this piece of code, let's grab it all the way over to the left side, and then open up the command palette with Command-Shift-P, and then open the Polacode app. And the one thing I would recommend, or the way this works, let me show you this first, is you just paste in the code. So there it is. And then I would recommend making this full screen. So now I get this really nice looking screenshot here, or this image, and it's just a simple button to export this thing. You can tell it where to save. I think I've done this before. We'll override that one. And now I've got this image on my desktop that I can share on Twitter or Instagram or anything like that. And it's got a nice style. It's got a nice format to it. And it's just really nice. It's really easy to do, and it's a great way to share your code with other people who might be interested. All right, next one up is the Prettier extension. And let me just start by saying, if you as a developer are worried about formatting your code yourself, you're probably doing it wrong. That's what tools are for. You don't have to worry about that stuff. Let the tooling take care of it. And one of those tools is Prettier. So what this will do is if I start adding in a bunch of unnecessary spaces and tabs, and I move this down to a new line, and I move this down here, and this down here, and this down here, and then I get rid of a semicolon, that sort of stuff. This is obviously terribly formatted. You wouldn't be able to read this because of the way it is. But what I've got set up is Prettier to run on save. So when I save this, it's going to format everything. And sometimes it's not 100% perfect as what you'd expect, but it's so worth it overall to not ever have to worry about specifically formatting your code and letting Prettier take care of it. So the one thing you'll want to do when you have that installed is check the format on save, or at least this is my preference. Check the format on save, which means it will go ahead and format every time you save your code, just like you saw in mine. Don't worry about formatting yourself. Let the tools take care of it. Trust me, you'll thank me. All right, next up is the advanced new file extension. Now this is a little less specific to web development, but it's very specific to me, and it's something I'm really passionate about. And I want to show you, there's no great way for me to do this. Let me grab my keyboard shortcuts and search for advanced new file. And I'm going to reset this key binding. So now that thing is going away. So what happens is if I do Command N or Control N, so Command N on Mac, Control N on Windows, what VS Code does by default is it creates a new file, but it doesn't have a name. It doesn't save it anywhere in here. I would have to Command S to then save this file and then choose where to go. I hate that experience. That experience drives me crazy. So if I come back and update this key binding, it should be Command N here. And I'm going to update this when. This is just for me. This should be when the terminal is not focused. All right, so if I do a Command N now, what this extension will do is it will prompt me to say, hey, which directory do you want to put this in? And I can scroll through a list or take my last selection or the current file or the root. Those are so handy. So let's just start with the root, and I'll do a test.txt. I've already got the test.js there. And this will generate that file. It will save it down here. And now I can go and not have to worry about using my mouse. Everything's through shortcuts and stuff. I really love this extension. I use it every single day. I highly recommend this one. Again, not super specific to web development, but just like taking advantage of VS Code itself. All right, next up is the Git Lens extension. I've got a couple of videos on working with Git inside of VS Code, and Git Lens is by far the most powerful extension that you can get, pun intended, I guess, for working with source control, for working with Git, and for working with GitHub. So if we take a look inside of here and I put my cursor on one of these lines, notice I get this kind of faint message over here. It says you, comma, 2 months ago, and initial commit. That is saying who wrote this code, how long ago was it checked in, and then what was the commit message. So blame information if you're familiar with that. I get the same information down in this toolbar, so these will all look the same, but it basically adapts based on what line of code you're on. And then if you saw, if I hover on this, now I get a lot more information, or at least I have the ability to go and click on that commit. If I do that, now I get a ton of different commands. I can show the commit in the search commits history. I can open files, open commit on GitHub. Let me show you what this search looks like. This will open it down here. This will show all of the files that were inside of that commit. You could click on them. All these were new. So now I can see that these files were added and so on and so on. Line history, file history, looking at branches and comparing commits across branches and all sorts of stuff. If you're working with Git and GitHub or Bitbucket or whatever, which you should be, you absolutely should be, then you should have this extension installed and take advantage of how powerful it is in supercharging your Git workflow. All right, next up is the Live Share extension. And this is a little less specific, again, to web development, but super, super useful for developers in general. And what this allows me to do is I can share a real-time collaborative development environment for other people to work in. So what that means is if I open a project on my machine, I can log in to Live Share with either GitHub or an Outlook account. When I do that, I can turn on Live Share. I get a unique link that I can send you or someone or a group of people, and they can then join that session. So what they will see is the same code that I am working on. They'll also be able to see my cursor as I move around. So if I wanted to kind of teach, say, hey, like line by line, this is what this does, this is what this does. Instead of sharing my screen on Zoom or something, now inside of Live Share, I could just give them access to the code directly and we could walk through stuff line by line. You can also show or share your like local host so they could run it on their machine as well. You can share your terminal if you want to. This is like really mind-blowingly powerful, and it's great for code reviews. It's great for teaching. It's great for learning. So you have any of those scenarios that you think make sense, definitely check out VS Code Live Share. All right, now we have the Quokka extension, and this is, for me, the easiest way to test out a very simple piece of JavaScript. This is a JavaScript scratchpad. I think a lot of times what you might do is you might come into your console inside of, not sources, but inside of console, and you might say something like, all right, what does new date actually return? Okay, that's what it gives me. That's not a very great experience for writing code. What would be a lot easier is if you could do this right inside of VS Code, and you can. So if I come down to the Quokka extensions, a new JavaScript file, now I can log out the same thing. So new date, and then my parentheses, it shows me in line what the output is, and then it also shows me those logs down here. So anytime you just want to test out a new piece of JavaScript, make sure to check out the Quokka extension and run it in that live scratchpad just like I did. All right, I've got two bonus extensions here for you just because I enjoy extensions in VS Code. So one is the Cobalt 2 theme official by Wesboss. This is the theme that I use. This is what lots of people ask me about. What theme are you using? What font? Which is Cascadia Code, by the way. But this is an amazing theme. I love it. You should check it out. The Cobalt 2 theme official by Wesboss. And the next thing is, you may have seen me talk about this in a previous video, the Setting Sync extension, which used to be a required extension. Now, it's actually kind of built into VS Code. So you can see in here, all the things that have been synced probably, from my settings, my snippets, my extensions, my shortcuts, all those sort of things are synced inside of here, thanks to VS Code. So this is kind of a pseudo extra extension where it used to be an extension. Now it's just built in, but I figured it was worth mentioning anyway. So Question of the day. What are your favorite extensions inside of VS Code? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks as always for checking out the videos, and I'll see you in the next one.